We're going to start at the beginning of chapter 15 with verse 1. Then there came to Yeshua scribes and Pharisees from Jerusalem, saying, "Why do your taught ones transgress the tradition of the elders, for they do not wash their hands when they eat bread?" But he answering said to them, "Why do you also transgress the command of Elohim because of your tradition?" Now, before we go forward, this is a really important point, and I get emails about this on a regular basis. We have to understand what this battle is between Yeshua and the Pharisees, what the real issue is. This is the same thing in Mark chapter 7 as well. We're going to read it here in Matthew. The idea about tradition. I recently got an email where a person was asking about, what about these traditions like matovu and tallits? And like, well, there's a difference between those traditions and this, which is nitzilat yadayim, which is a tradition about how to wash the hands. So let's understand, before we go into Matthew 15 here, what the issue is. First of all, the issue is that traditions, and by the way, you'll see nowhere in here does Yeshua tell them that this tradition of washing the hands is wrong. Okay, the issue here was that the Pharisees and scribes says, "Why do your students transgress a tradition?" And he says, "Why are you upset about that when you transgress the law because of some of your traditions?" And so this then gets into the anti-Semitic part of the body as being, well, all of this Jewish stuff, the tradition is wrong. Nonsense. Just like a lot of the things you learn in Christianity by tradition, they're not wrong either. Okay? Almost all of you probably were taught and still pray before you eat. All right? That's a tradition. There's no commandment to pray before you eat. But you do it. Let's understand that there's traditions that are good, there are traditions that are neutral, and there are traditions that are bad. So what are we talking about? A tradition is only a problem if the tradition in some way, A, undermines or overrides Torah, okay, undermines or overrides Torah, or the tradition is treated like it's Torah. Then that's really not the tradition's fault, it's the way you're treating it, okay? In other words, all of you that when you were children and you forgot to pray before you ate, went to grab the food and got smacked, okay, that was somebody that thought it was the law and not a tradition. By the way, that was in a mainstream Christian house where they're not keeping the law. Right. Okay? Yeah, no, we're not under the law. Yeah, try eating without praying in that house and see if you don't get looked at and glared at and smacked. I do that, by the way, when I know people are so new. If I'm at their house, as soon as they go to sit down and eat, I'm picking something up and putting it in my mouth watching. And the kids are like, "Mom!" And the mom's like, "Yeah, Rabbi, you had to do that, you know." Caught you. I'll do that just to catch them, to say, look, you've got your traditions that you've elevated to law. Be careful with that. Okay? Generally in the Jewish understandings, the Jewish traditions, 99% of what I run into is the problem of them elevating it to law. There are a few that Yeshua is going to mention here that were at that time were actually abrogating or getting in the way with keeping the law. But just understand that tradition is only a problem if it is elevated to be equal to or above Torah. That's it. If you treat it equal to or somehow above Torah. Okay? Otherwise, because if it's a tradition that goes against Torah, it's not really a tradition, it's just sin. You're just doing something that's against Torah. Okay? But let's understand what traditions. So by the way, someone might ask, what about the tradition of wearing a tallit? Well, a tallit is simply a traditional garment to fulfill Numbers chapter 15, which says to wear the seat in the corners of your garment. And so instead of having it added to every garment you have, they decided to make a garment that has a seat on it that they wear on top of all their clothes or underneath their clothes, a tallit katan. So it's attached to that garment. It's a very wise and logical tradition. It's a good tradition, okay? Now, if you start telling everybody that the only way to wear tzitzit is to wear it on a tallit, now you've made it into a Torah command. The Torah never mentions that being the only way to wear your tzitzit. Can we see the difference? Okay? And by the way, when Elijah threw his mantle to Elisha, he was probably throwing his tallit. Okay? All right. So let's just understand as we go into this chapter, We're going to deal with a right understanding of tradition. But we have to deal with the reality of anti-Semitism in the body, which means that when people come into this from outside, and when they see the way a lot of what the church had been doing is getting beaten to death, they feel like to balance things out, they need to beat the Jewish stuff to death too. Don't just do that, okay? The only things that need to be dealt with are the things that actually need to be dealt with, not because they're Christian and not because they're Jewish, but just because they're wrong. Don't worry about what the source is so much. Either it's right or it's wrong, either it's okay or it's not okay. By the way, there's a difference between right and wrong and okay and not okay. Okay, praying before you eat is not right or wrong. It's just okay. Do you understand? Because to be right or wrong, there needs to be a commandment. A commandment tells you what's right and what's wrong. But if you're not dealing with right and wrong, sometimes there's things that's okay and not okay.